Hi there. Welcome once again to Prices at the Pumps, our weekly Wednesday look at all things energy related right here on SaltWire. I'm Scott Squires, pleased as always to be joined by the energy expert Dan McTeague. And Dan, gosh, we've got a couple things to talk about this week, but let's start where we always do and what consumers want to know most of all. Prices at the pumps adjusted in Atlantic Canada tomorrow, in Newfoundland and Labrador, and then the rest of the region on Friday. What are we going to see when we pull up to the pump and fill up our vehicles, Dan?
You know, Scott, we've talked about it here first at SaltWire. We've said for some time that the market's going to turn around. And when it does, it's going to be very unpleasant. We've seen prices drop or moderate, but we now know there's a big problem. And the problem is demand is robust, supply just isn't there. And of course, other factors are starting to weigh very heavily on the price of fuel. And as a result, tomorrow in Newfoundland, you're looking at least a 6 cent a liter increase for gasoline. I'm quite surprised the PUB didn't move on that yet, but that's what we're looking at for tomorrow in Newfoundland, and almost about 8 cents a liter for diesel and home heating fuel. So a bit of advice, maybe an unfriendly St. Valentine's Day gift: fuel up today, because you're going to be very disappointed if you wait until tomorrow in Newfoundland. Very similar situation will occur in PEI, Nova Scotia, and of course New Brunswick, where gasoline is going to be moving up by at least 5 cents a liter, and diesel about 7.5, maybe even 8.5 cents a liter. Any way you slice it, the price is going up, and it's gone up everywhere else, by the way. So here in Ontario, for instance, where I am, tomorrow gasoline to be $1.54, but the tax here is at least 15, 16 cents less than what it is in Newfoundland and equivalent places in Atlantic Canada. So what you're seeing here and what you will see on Thursday and Friday right here in Atlantic Canada is a reflection of what's happened on world markets with respect to energy prices, which reflect finally a modicum of reality. And people should be very concerned that we're seeing a dwindling supply at a time of year in which supply doesn't normally get constrained. Of course, we have other issues. Refineries tend to go through maintenance at this time of year. But this time last year, global inventories of oil were up about 80 million barrels. This year, they're down 40 million barrels. So a bit of a reverse, and I think that's going to set the trend for the rest of the year.
So, Dan, here we are on Valentine's Day, and no love at the pumps is what you're telling us for Atlantic Canada. What about heating oil as well? Because we've been hit with a couple of big storms here. Temperatures have gone down. Certainly a lot more heating fuel being used recently than perhaps the last couple of months. What are you seeing in that area?
Yeah, heating oil will be going up as well, almost 8 cents a liter, but it has to be balanced by the fact that, thankfully, Canadian and American producers of natural gas have been going, wild in terms of production. And so natural gas prices have fallen. Propane prices have fallen. We have had that up till now, very warm temps here in North America and across much of the Western Hemisphere since about the end of January. That, of course, is coming to an end. Despite the major storms you had in Atlantic Canada, it means that the prices are still, relatively speaking, a little less than what they were the last year, despite the second carbon tax kicking in, the clean fuel regulation. So all said, this is probably as good as it gets. And from this point forward, it's going to start to get a little bit more expensive. On the home heating side, oil, we're going to continue to see that move higher right up until about the first or second week of April. At that point, it starts to taper off as demand drops. But heating oil is also a proxy for diesel. Diesel prices are on the move. And that's because diesel production is globally is still extraordinarily tight. Places like the United States are not producing enough diesel because they're not importing enough heavy Canadian oil. There's a cost and consequence for that. When you block pipelines, it tends to have a boomerang effect for years to come.
Dan, you often talk about fundamentals and somehow and sometimes that they don't play into what's happening. But are you now starting to see some of those fundamentals come into play, whether because of what's happening geopolitically in Ukraine and in the Middle East or other things? Maybe just a quick word about what you're seeing with those fundamentals that could affect what we're paying going forward for energy.
Well, 2024 is going to be much more expensive than 2023, and not just because of a weak Canadian dollar, because there aren't enough resources being sold to the rest of the world, and not because the federal government continues to increase its carbon taxes on fuel. But we're also looking at a scenario where, if you think about it, the oil that we're using today to produce the 80% of the energy needs of the world was discovered in the 1990s. we're going through production and supply that was planned and created 30, 35 years ago. We're not replacing those spare barrels or those barrels that we're using today. What it means is the long-term forecast, as demand continues right to the horizon to increase. No one is now of the view that there's peak demand. It's not happening. The global population is growing. Nations want more access to hydrocarbons. Of course, the question is how you manage it. But beyond that, on the issue, the strict issue of supply and demand, economics 101, demand's robust and supply just isn't there. Too much emphasis on green and transition and ESG has really put a constraint on the supply, and that's going to have damaging impacts, not just for those who use fossil fuels, not just for those who use hydrocarbons, but everything we touch, every mine that is used to bring out products, whether it's for an EV or a windmill or a solar panel, all require fossil fuels. So we're in a bit of a bind here. And I think realistically, I think we're going to have to figure our way out of this because we can't do one without the other.
And Dan, you mentioned EVs and we talk about electric vehicles and electrification all the time. Something that's gotten a lot of headlines, and I've certainly seen a ton of it this morning, are comments coming out of Ottawa recently. And I'm going to put up an article that appeared on SaltWire. And you see it right there. Feds won't fund new roads, existing network, perfectly adequate, Guilbeault says. And then it goes on to say, a quote, "There will be no more envelopes from the federal government to enlarge the road network," Environment and Climate Change Minister tells reporters in Montreal. Dan, what do you make of that?
Well, Stephen Guilbeault is a fanatic. He is a climate fanatic. This is exactly what he said 20, 30 years ago when he was scaling towers here in Toronto, the CN Tower, or when he was, showing up at the house of then Premier Ralph Klein's and scaring the bejesus out of his wife. This is a fellow who has this view of the world in which we are not going to see progress. We are going to see the entire economy. We're going to see the way of life of Canadians wind back. And even though our population is increasing about 3.5% a year, a lot of that immigration, and even though we need to rebuild infrastructure, especially in a country like Canada, which isn't just growing, but our commerce and our economy depends very heavily on it, we also have weather, which does tremendous damage to our roads. He's saying no more. I think it takes an extraordinary amount of arrogance and gall for one individual to do that. I think there's a simple solution. Because as a Liberal member of Parliament of 18 years, I will not vote for these folks, and I will work very hard to knock them out. They are trying to kill the oil and gas sector, our number one economic generator for which the world wants more of our fuel. They're killing manufacturing. They want to kill the transport sector. And now with this proposal, what do you think that says to the automotive industry? No more roads, no more cars. And you folks who drive around, we're going to control you as far as you drive. So I don't think this is at all a surprise. But when Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of the Liberals and the NDP, bring a fanatic to run such a sensitive portfolio, is it any wonder that provinces are starting to push back severely, that we have to take this government to court where they're inevitably losing? I think Canadians, especially here in Atlantic Canada, need to recognize that this man has a plan. It's a very pernicious and very dangerous one for Canadians. He has no business doing it. He should go back to scaling towers.
Something else, Dan, as well, is that, part of this discussion or plan, there's mention of getting more people out of private cars. I don't know about you. I love my car. And into more public transit. And I'm not sure what it's like in Montreal or Ottawa, but certainly in Nova Scotia, outside of HRM and a lot of other places in Canada, coast to coast in such a huge country, I'm not sure how robust public transit is in a lot of areas outside the metro urban areas across Canada. Again, this is just obviously your opinion, Dan, of someone that's been in this industry for a long time. And you worked in the automotive industry with Toyota, as you've mentioned previously on other episodes of Prices at the Pumps. But what do you make of this? Like, how are Canadians going to deal with having to use or being asked to give up your private car, try public transit?
Yeah, this isn't Scotland, Norway, or Liechtenstein, or Vatican City, where you can walk around or take public transit. For the vast majority of wilderness in this country, you need that kind of efficient transportation. It does signal something very ironic for me. This is a government and a minister that wants you to drive electric vehicles by 2035. That's just sort of the part of the plan because they can control that. They know it's inefficient. They know it's unreliable. They know they can't subsidize it forever. They do want you to take public transit. My view is that those who believe they should have EVs in the cities and think they're cool and they're wonderful for the environment, get over yourself. Take the bus, take the subway if you happen to be here in Toronto. But for the rest of us who actually need long, lengthy travel from one place to another to get to work, the cost of living, for goodness sakes, thanks to the government borrowing money, spending, allowing, the printing of money, we've seen a major housing crisis in which many people have to drive further out than where they work in the big smoke. So, these guys are not real. There are frauds. And it's important for people to understand that when they propose these things, it's all about their idealism, an idealism that does not include the interests nor take into the reality of most Canadians. And I think it's an absolute disgrace that more people are not in a position of influence to call these things off. I will do it because I have the experience and the creds to do it. But I can tell you, if Canadians don't like what's happened to their country with affordability over the past few years, wait to see what these folks have in store. These are ideologues who belong in some academic debating society, kept away from the rest of us. They certainly should be in a position of determining policy in this country. It's time for them to go.
Dan, it's always great to be able to have your insights on this because you do speak on it from a place of knowledge and understanding. And I mentioned your time with Toyota as well. I always like to mention, you were an MP for 18 years and served in government for longer than that. But you and I were talking before we came on to record this, and you were telling me something that could be a game changer in a transition to different kinds of vehicles from Toyota. What can you tell us?
Well, look, I don't work for the company. I happened to be there last evening. I was invited. I was downtown to go see some old friends I hadn't seen in a long time. The new CEO is someone I worked with 30 some odd years ago before I was a member of parliament. And they had a revelation. There was a number of media as well, but they introduced two old vehicles that they brought back, the Toyota Crown and, of course, the Land Cruiser, which we'd always chimed about back in the day when it ended in Canada in 1989. Here's what's interesting. In part of the demonstration unveiling, they talked about why they're number one in Canada. They have been for the past 5 years. One of the things that they alluded to was the fact that they had a game changer in terms of technology. And the technology is this. By 2027, they will have ready a vehicle that is a solid state battery EV that takes about 10 minutes to charge, not 40 minutes, not 60 minutes, and can run about 1,000 kilometers. They say that will be made available in 2027. I take that company at its word because in 1991, they also brought the prototype of the Tsunami, which today is the Prius, which of course is a game changer as far as hybrids are concerned. So I think my bigger concern isn't that I think that's great. And if it happens to be correct, it is definitely going to be an incentive for a lot of people to think about a new form of EVs. I'm more concerned about a government that put all its eggs in one type of lithium-ion battery basket. And we've committed billions of dollars to Northvolt, Stellantis, Volkswagen, God knows who else, on a technology and production of batteries that may very well be obsolete by the time these plants are up and running and ready to go. So I hope I'm wrong. But I think the fact that this isn't discussed is going to create a bit of a conundrum among the EV crowds, especially those who've been boosting the billions of dollars of money we don't have. We had to borrow in order to give these companies to incentivize them to come over here and build. I think at the end of the day, I think a lot more attention is going to be paid to why Toyota said, if we're going to go EVs, we're going to go on our own. And we won't do it by doing what the others have done, which is grifting and looking after themselves and all their buddies at your expense and mine and generations to come in terms of debt.
And Dan, it's interesting because something that you've talked about over the weeks and months that we talk about EVs and certainly talked about the Volkswagen and Stellantis deals, those tens of billions of dollars for those battery plants. You said, what if the technology changes? What if a new battery comes along? And if I'm guessing this right, because I'm certainly not an insider in the industry, it seems to me that you're saying that Toyota is saying that within a few years, they are going to have this game-changing battery. If they do deliver on this, Dan, what could it mean for the overall full view of electric vehicles in this country?
Well, a company like that isn't number one in the world because it virtue signals. It's a company, or because it grifts or takes money from governments. It's a company that's committed to helping people and to building a product that has stood the test of time. I don't think it's just this particular technology that particular company has. Others will have it as well. But as more and more companies are walking away from EVs, recognizing that they may not be the thing for consumers, and consumers are having significant doubts, I think we're going to see emerge from all of this, Scott. And let me say it here first in SaltWire. In all the studies I've done on this and merging some of the ideas on energy with automotive with affordability, you're going to see in the next 20 years, several car manufacturers with diverse power options: internal combustion, hybrid, ammonia. We've talked about hydrogen, solid state battery, salt batteries. I mean, this is something China has been working on for quite some time. I think when I'm ready to leave this great planet, my children and grandchildren are going to have a significant number of options in terms of how to get from point A to point B. And by then, of course, we won't have a government mandating EVs. We'll have a government recognizing that there are many great options out there, all of them clean, all of them technologically advanced, and all of them with a principle of ensuring that Canadians are benefited by reliable, cost-efficient modes of transportation.
It's interesting, Dan. A couple of your mantras are, look before you leap, and don't put all your eggs in one basket. And that's why it's always great to have you here. And it sounds like we've got a lot to talk about in the weeks and months ahead. Always appreciate having you right here on Prices at the Pumps on SaltWire, Dan. But when you're not with us, where can people reach out to you, connect with you, debate you, and just send you a message?
Well, you see a lot of people on X now, on Twitter, and that's where I revealed the stuff that I learned last evening about this solid state battery. But yes, Gas Price Wizard, best way to get a hold of me. And of course, if you want up-to-date information as to where gas prices are going, gaswizard.ca. On the policy side, Canadians for Affordable Energy, I'm president there. I do a lot of writing when I have a lot of time, and I do have a little bit of time. So have a look at what I'm doing there. And of course, when it comes to the latest and most important things happening as I see them across the country, come right here to SaltWire. You're going to get first my thoughts before anywhere else.
Well, we certainly appreciate that, Dan. And it always is a learning experience each and every week that we have you on with us. We appreciate your time. All the best to you and all of yours there in Ontario. Enjoy the rest of your week. Have a wonderful weekend. I've still got some more shoveling and clearing out to do, but let's do this again next week. What do you say?
Let's do that. I'm about to get some chocolates. Otherwise, I'll be spending the week in the garage.
All good. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Scott.